Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Moxxie Coaching podcast. My name is Michelle, and I'm your host. And I am so glad that you joined me today for this episode about the tarot in coaching and how I use it in my practice. I'll be talking a little bit about how I came to the tarot. I'll be talking a little bit about my philosophy of the tarot and how I use it in my practice, and how and why a tarot deck is a good tool for not only guided coaching but for self-coaching as well. In the 80s, I began to have a general interest in metaphysics. I started looking at astral travel, the chakra system, a little bit of numerology. I dipped my toe into a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different modalities. I'm not even really sure what to call them in that context, because really what I was looking for was just some sort of something I could grab onto from the perspective of, what did I believe? What was my belief system about the world and about the universe and how it worked? And I had not been raised with a religion of any sort. So around the time that I was in college, I really began to feel like I needed to figure out what I believed and what I thought. And the tarot was just one little part of that whole process of diving in and exploring and learning all of these new things. So I played around with the tarot at that time. I think I only had just the one deck at that time. And, I would look at the deck, and I loved the imagery. As an artist, I have a tendency to be sold on things because of packaging or because of imagery. And so for me, it was just super fun to look at all these different tarot cards and look at the different meanings and look at the different interpretations, the different visual interpretations of those meanings. But like I said, I had one, maybe two decks, and I really didn't do a whole lot with it, right? I'm in college, I'm going to school, I'm trying to, date, do all of those other things that I was doing in school. And so the tarot was just something I would pick up and I would put down, and, it was interesting, but I never dove into it until later in life. And it was, I think, around 2015, maybe 2016, a little while after the death of my mother. And her death really was another catalyst for me in terms of trying to figure out what I knew, what I believed. I was kind of ticked that she didn't come back and tell me, hey, this is what it's like over here on the other side. So, and her death had been sudden. There had been no closure. And she and I had a good relationship. And so it was just really frustrating. And I kind of just like wanted to connect again. And so in that time period, I got my tarot cards back out. And I started looking at them, and I suppose you might say, well, what does the death of your mother have to do with your tarot cards? And in my mind, all of these, let's see, where does the death of my mom have to do with the tarot cards? I guess it has to do with it from the perspective that really it was just a time that called me back to realizing that I didn't have a firm belief system that I could use the way other people use their belief systems for comfort and for guidance. And so that's sort of how I started exploring the tarot again. And basically what happened is I had been doing a lot of meditation, I'd been doing a lot of yoga, a lot of very intentional work, internal work to open myself up to whatever the universe had to offer me. I was feeling really stuck, I was feeling frustrated, and that was right around the time when I just threw my hands up and said, hey, I need some help. Yo, universe, whoever, whatever is out there, please, make yourself known to me because I'm really struggling. And at that time, I started to notice my intuition was kicking in, and I was getting what seemed like really random drop-in, what do I want to call them? Drop-in knowings. And one of those drop-in knowings, one of those things that it was almost like an auditory sensation, which was, you need to get your tarot cards back out. You need to work with your tarot cards again. And I listened to myself and went downstairs, dug out my tarot cards, and have been pretty intensely working and studying with them since then. And what I found is that I actually have a knack for reading, that I'm able to open up the intuitive flow, and by doing that, I'm able to allow whatever you want to call it, universal knowledge, I don't know, deity knowledge, information from the universe, whatever you want to call it, I'm able to open up and receive information when I'm working in the tarot cards, as well as just sort of random other times. I am not great at controlling it. I'm certainly not really great at using it as a tool on demand. But I can use it as a tool on demand if I use it with my tarot cards. So I started to do free readings for friends and readings online and that type of thing. And I began journaling and recording my readings. And it was then that I realized how often a reading or a specific card inside of a reading could be a jumping off point for some healing, introspective journaling or internal work. And that was really the beginning of my journey using the tarot for my own coaching purposes. And it's this same approach that informs my use of tarot in my coaching practice. So what is the tarot? I think it depends who you ask, but I also believe that everyone can agree that at its core, the tarot is a deck of cards with images printed on them, and in and of themselves, the cards have no power, no juju, no spiritual muster of their own. They're an inanimate object that is used as a tool to tap into our subconscious and our intuition. And while some people look at the tarot as a tool of divination, as a tool to, quote, read the future, I don't use the tarot that way. My personal belief is that as human beings, we have far, far too much free will to let anything, a tarot deck, crystal reading, runes, astrology, any of those things, to let them control our future. As human beings, we just do random crap all the time. So from the perspective of being able to tell someone what their future is going to look like when that person is going to leave my presence or the presence of a different reader and go off and live their life in a way that I have no idea what they're doing, no way of knowing what they're doing. How are they moving forward in the way that I suggested? Are they moving forward in a different way? Has something completely random come up for them that's changing their life in that moment at that time? So to be used as a tool of divination, I think, is a disservice to the client as well as to the tarot itself. The best use I have found, and the best way that I have found the tarot works as a tool, is in addressing the here and the now. And because of that, it's an excellent tool for coaching. It's a visual medium. There must be thousands of tarot decks available these days. And each deck has its own, I'm going to take that back. Almost every deck has its own unique imagery. Most tarot decks today are based on Rider-Smith-Waite deck that was basically created in the Victorian period. And it was a new incarnation of an extremely old practice. I don't want to get too bogged down in the history of the tarot. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about it. But it's not completely relevant to the conversation. So anyway, the tarot addresses best what is in front of us right now, what we are dealing with at the moment. Because the tarot is based on individual images, unique images, it's similar to the Rorschach tests in psychology. The tests, you might have heard them called inkblot tests. But essentially, the concept is to take a look at an image and explain how that image makes you feel, what emotions come up, what sensations come up, what memories it jogs, all of those types of things. And Rorschach tests are used traditionally in psychology. Now, what's interesting is there is a small and quiet movement in psychology, in clinical psychology and therapy, to bring the tarot in as maybe not a substitute for the inkblot Rorschach tests, but as a complementary tool. And we're finding that it's becoming more and more accepted, which I just think is fascinating, that blend of what some people would go so far as to say is an occult art with modern clinical psychology. The world of science and the world of how the brain works is changing so regularly and so consistently, and we're finding all of these connections between physics and psychology and physiology and energy that it's mind-blowing. So that is a little bit of an aside, but you can tell that I kind of get geeked about it. Okay, so why is it valuable to have an image of something that elicits a feeling? Well, it's helpful because so much of the time there are things that are with us that are in our subconscious. Things that could be old patterning, old belief systems. It could be, let's say your mother was a really, really thin, hyper crazy workout person. And while she never intentionally made you feel bad about yourself, she perhaps fed you in a way that she thought would help you lose that 10 pounds or whatever, right? So while she never said anything, you got the subconscious message that something, maybe not quite good enough. So you've got this subconscious message buried under all the other subconscious messages that we have. And using the tarot is a way to put ourselves into some of the situations in the cards, or to use them as an illustration for how you're feeling. How do I articulate this? They're a wonderful tool to help the light bulb come on, to help that light bulb of the idea, the light bulb of, oh, I get it now. Or, oh my goodness, I never saw that about myself until I started to look at things from this perspective. That's, in a nutshell, that's my philosophy about tarot, that it is an excellent tool. It can be used to mirror back to us what we need to learn by tickling those subconscious memories and impulses that we have and bringing them to the surface so we can examine them. One of the reasons the tarot is such an excellent tool for coaching is that each card in the tarot deck illustrates an aspect of either our life or our emotion from a universal perspective as a human being. In general, the tarot cards they're not meant to be culturally tied to any one particular culture. Now, you will find decks that maybe lean toward a Celtic Irish theme, or you might find a deck that leans toward a Native American or an indigenous theme or something along those lines. But in general, each card represents a feeling or an event or an archetypal universal theme throughout humanity. And that's one of the reasons that it's so valuable. I can be coaching someone in my hometown, but I can take that same deck of cards and coach someone in a completely different culture, because the human experience is a universal one. I don't care if you're living in a small town in middle America, or you're living in an ashram in India, or if you're living in a hut in Costa Rica. Our feelings, our core emotions, our needs, our desires are all the same. We're all human, and that's the beauty of the tarot. It's universal. It will speak to anyone who's willing to listen. The deck itself is split up into 2 or 3 different sections, depending how you look at it. The first section is called the Major Arcana, and the Major Arcana is made up of cards that represent the big stuff in life. There are big life changes, our coming to terms with anything we need to come to terms with. There are cards that are representing everything from our ability to create the life we want to create, to the card that recognizes that strength is not always physical strength, or the card that reminds us that balance is essential in everything in life. Universal themes, right? Those are the major arcana cards, and a lot of times people will associate specific archetypal themes with the cards in the major arcana. And I'm not going to get into that. If we do more tarot podcasts, we can talk more about that. The minor arcana cards are a set of 40 cards in 4 different categories. So just like a traditional playing deck, except instead of instead of spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds, the suits are wands, swords, discs, or cups. So very similar. And each of these cards represents smaller life experiences, day-to-day life, so to speak. So for example, the Ten of Wands is a card that shows a person struggling under the weight of trying to carry 10 wands, basically 10 sticks that look like they're about a foot taller than the person who's trying to carry them, and he's trying to carry them all at once without them falling over, and it's a heavy burden. It's a challenging time for that person, right? So that is, again, who has not felt that way? Who has not felt completely buried under the weight of something? So each of those 40 cards represents something different in that realm of the smaller stuff in our life. And the last group are the court cards. And the court cards are similar to playing cards, the king, the queen, the jack. And then in the tarot, there is a page, which would be one step below the jack. The pages are typically considered like an adolescent, a teenage age type person. So again, I am just very barely glossing over, because the tarot has an incredibly rich history and a complicated everything. It's fascinating how many different things and different ways you can approach it. But the members of the court cards carry a specific type of energy depending on who they are and depending on which of the 4 suits they represent. So, for example, the Queen of Cups is traditionally a woman who has an incredibly intuitive nature and is very giving and emotive, and has this energy of positivity and possibility. Whereas the Knight of Discs is extremely serious, and it's a young person who is very, very focused on doing what's right and staying grounded, and is the person that you could count on come hell or high water. That person is going to be there for you. That is a dependable, energetic entity. So, like I said, tons of information, tons of possibility. We could just do podcast after podcast on the tarot, but I want to work with you to have an understanding, or to begin to have an understanding of how I use it and why, and for you to hopefully see the value in it that I see. Just as a caveat here, when I talk about the images in the tarot cards, Goodness. I am speaking specifically about the more modern Rider-Smith weight cards that came into being late 1800s, early 1900s. And that deck has become somewhat of a universal standard on which a large percentage of other tarot decks base their imagery. So when I say the Ten of Wands is a person carrying a big burden, a big pile of sticks, or a big pile of wands, that's the image in the Rider-Smith weight deck. In another deck, the imagery could be different, but the imagery is eliciting that same feeling of being burdened or overwhelmed. So basically what I'm saying is most of the modern tarot decks today are riffing on the imagery from the Rider-Smith weight deck. And that's why we can have these conversations about a particular card, and even if you have a different deck, as long as you have a Rider-Smith weight deck, you're going to understand the imagery that I'm referring to. One of the places that I find the tarot the most useful in coaching is when someone is struggling to process some sort of interaction they had with someone else and process their feelings, process how they may interpret the other person feeling, and that type of thing. It's a way to sort of dig in a little bit without having to get into intimate personal details if the client doesn't necessarily want to. So we can look at the tarot cards as an opportunity for the client to take a look at the cards and to pull, just based on the imagery, the cards that speak to them in some way, whether it's cards that feel like they represent the person that they are having a conflict with, or cards that represent how they are feeling, cards that represent a potential solution to a problem. Just by having the luxury of having this set of 78 cards, all with completely different images in front of them, and being able to look at it and really open themselves up to the imagery and open themselves up to their subconscious and letting their subconscious choose the card that's appropriate. It never ceases to amaze me how, whether it is a client consciously picking a card turned face up, or even more amazing is when, and this happens all the time, when we shuffle the tarot cards and the cards that resonate with whatever situation we're looking into come up. There's some kind of connection between the energy that we put into shuffling the cards, the energy that we put into processing the purpose of the reading and the question to the cards, that from a quantum physics perspective, I cannot completely articulate. But by putting that energy out there, inevitably the cards we need to see are the cards that show up. In a coaching session, we can use the tarot from either perspective. We can either use it as a tool for the client to awaken something in their subconscious, or we can use the tarot from a traditional perspective, doing a traditional reading, talking together about what the cards mean to the individual, me sharing the traditional meaning of the cards and how those two may tie together. So there are infinite ways and combinations of ways that we can use the tarot in the coaching practice that ultimately really help the clients begin to call on their own intuition and begin to start to recognize that they may be able to do at least some coaching on their own with a deck of tarot cards. When I coach someone who chooses to use the tarot cards as a part of their coaching practice, I do require them to have a deck of their own. And that's simply because most of the time my readings and my coaching conversations are done virtually. And in order for someone to really truly integrate the use of the tarot, they need to have a deck of their own if we're not in the same place at the same time. I have a couple different decks that I recommend people. They're both extremely reasonably priced. You can pick them up on Amazon and that type of thing. But it is important that you have that deck of cards that you can begin to impart your energy to, that you can become familiar with and become friends with in a way. Tarot readers have kind of weird relationships with their tarot decks, different relationships with different tarot decks, which you would come to understand if you decided that you wanted to explore some self-coaching with the tarot. So the exact process I use really does vary from client to client. It depends a lot on their situation that they're in. It depends on what they're trying to accomplish. But I think, or at least I hope, that gives you somewhat of a feel for how I would integrate the tarot into a coaching session with you. If you are interested in using the tarot for yourself and maybe just for your own self-coaching, I would recommend that you check out my weekly Instagram posts. Every Saturday is Self-Coaching Saturday, and I post a card of the week, and I post a very, very brief little explanation about the card. I walk you through a series of questions that you can ask the card or ask of yourself in relationship to that card, that are kind of equivalent to like a writing prompt or something like that, to get you thinking and to get you processing and to get you connecting with the cards and using your intuition, using your physical sensations and everything that we as humans have available to us to begin to communicate with the cards and communicate with our intuition and subconscious on a more, a more reliable level. And that is on Instagram and on Facebook every Saturday. The card will vary depending on what's going on in the universe. When I choose a card, I choose it just based on a general card that would kind of just reflect the energy that's going on at that moment and for that week. So there's certainly nothing extremely intimate or specific about each card. But that also means that some cards could be pulled more than once. That means that some cards could, it could take us a while to get to some cards, just depending on what comes up when they come up in my weekly pull. And then at the end of that Instagram and Facebook post, there is an image or a slide that has the traditional meaning of that tarot card. So you're walked through working to develop your own understanding of the card before you're given the traditional meaning of the card. And I do that because I think that it's important for anyone who's using the tarot for self-coaching to really begin to learn about what each card means for them. And while there are traditional meanings to the tarot cards that have been around, for years, those are open to interpretation based on your gut, right? If you're looking at a card that the traditional meaning is X, Y, or Z, but you're looking at it and you can feel it, you can physically feel it in your gut that maybe that's not the meaning of this card for you at this time. It's a great way to start getting into touch with that. And the more you can get into touch with that, the better you know yourself. The better you know yourself, the smoother life goes. Not always, but sometimes. And I think the better we know ourselves, the better we're able to anticipate sticky spots, and the better we're able to anticipate potential tricky things to navigate in life. I personally use the tarot on my own for my own self-coaching in between my sessions with my professional coach. And I have found it a really nice way to balance out and keep me on track in between our meetings that are every 2 weeks. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the other however many hours in a 2-week span. So it's really nice to be able to just, sit down and check in and sort of recenter myself using the cards. And I would like that to be something that you could do for yourself as well. So we will continue our conversation on the tarot, and we'll continue conversation about how we can use it for our own benefit. And if you're interested in learning more about it, I would love to have you tag along. Reach out to me with any questions that you have. And please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, do all of those things. And I will look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate your taking some time out of what I suspect is an extremely busy day to visit with me. And I hope you have a fantastic week. Be well.